My daughter's boyfriend laughed at my simple life, so I showed him what real power looks like. It started at my own dinner table. My daughter had brought home her new boyfriend, a guy who carried himself like he owned the world. He was sharp-dressed, polished, the kind of person who couldn't sit without checking his reflection in the nearest window. At first, I was polite. I asked about his work, his plans, his hobbies. But instead of answering, he smirked and said, "I don't really need to work. My dad handles all that. I'm focused on enjoying life." The way he said it like responsibility was beneath him set my teeth on edge. Still, I let it slide. I didn't want to embarrass my daughter in front of him, but then he leaned back in his chair, gave my modest home a quick glance, and chuckled. "This is cozy. Don't worry, though. Once she's with me, she won't have to settle for this lifestyle anymore. I'll be taking care of her now." The words landed like a slap. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between loyalty and embarrassment. I met his eyes, steady and calm, and simply said, "Good luck." He laughed, mistaking my quiet for weakness. But inside, I felt a slow burn. He didn't know who he was talking to. He thought I was just some simple man living a simple life. What he didn't know was that his father, his proud, well-respected father, was an executive at my company. His future depended on me. For the rest of the evening, I played the role of the quiet host. Let him talk about his expensive trips, his designer clothes, his belief that money solved everything. My daughter tried to smile through it, but I could see her unease. I kept my words measured, my tone calm, but in my mind, the decision was already made. The next morning, I called HR. I told them to process the termination paperwork for his father immediately. Not out of spite, but because arrogance at the top bleeds into the bottom. And frankly, I was done pretending I hadn't seen enough. Within days, the storm hit. His father called me first, angry, then desperate. I kept it professional, explaining the reasons, the performance issues, the fit no longer aligning with the company's values. He tried to argue, but the decision was final. And just like that, the rich boyfriend's safety net vanished. I knew it wouldn't take long before the consequences trickled down. Without his father's support, his so-called wealth was nothing but smoke and mirrors. A week later, my phone buzzed. The same arrogant young man who had laughed at my simple lifestyle was now begging for a meeting. His voice, once dripping with pride, was shaky, rushed. "Please, sir, can we reconsider this? You don't understand what this means for me." But I understood perfectly. He had told me he'd take care of my daughter. Now stripped of the very foundation he relied on, he was the one who needed saving. And I wasn't sure I was willing to give it. The first call came from the father. His voice, once firm and confident, carried a shaky edge. "We've worked together for years. Surely there's a way to reconsider. My son, he's not handling this well." I kept my tone measured. This isn't about your son. It's about performance, direction, and accountability. The decision stands. He tried to press further, but I didn't budge. Business was business, and his arrogance had finally caught up with him. Later that afternoon, the son himself called. Gone was the smug laughter from my dinner table. Instead, his voice cracked with desperation. "Please, sir, you don't understand. My father cutting me off changes everything. I can't lose this lifestyle. You've got to help me." I let a silence hang before replying.
Funny.
"At my table, you told me you'd be taking care of my daughter now. Seems like you can't even take care of yourself." His breathing quickened, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But all he said was, "Please, just give me a chance." That night my daughter called me. Her voice was tight, worried. "Dad, what happened? He's been acting strange all week. Said something about his dad losing his job, and he hinted you had something to do with it." I didn't dodge. It's true. His father's position wasn't working out, and I made the call. But what matters here is you, not him. You need to see the man behind the act. He mocked my life, laughed at my values, and pretended he could provide for you when everything he had came from someone else. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I didn't know he said that to you." Her words told me enough she hadn't seen the full picture yet. She had only glimpsed his charm, his confidence, the polished surface. But cracks were spreading fast, and now she was starting to notice. Over the next few days, more reports trickled in. Friends mentioned seeing him out, not with his usual swagger, but sulking, arguing loudly on the phone. The man who had once strutted around like a king now looked like a commoner stripped of his crown. And then, the inevitable happened. He showed up at my office, unannounced. Security called me down, and there he was, suit wrinkled, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot. He looked nothing like the self-assured young man who had sneered at my dinner table. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything. Just talk to my father. Get him reinstated. I'll prove myself to you. Just don't let this be the end." I studied him for a long moment. This wasn't about my company anymore. It was about the kind of man he truly was when stripped of comfort. And what I saw wasn't strength, it was emptiness. I wasn't sure my daughter could see it yet, but I knew soon enough she would. 2 nights later, my daughter came over for dinner. She looked troubled, her fork pushing food around her plate without eating. Finally, she sighed and asked, "Dad, did you really fire his father because of me?" I set my fork down. No, his father's performance had been slipping for a while. But your boyfriend's arrogance at my table only confirmed what I already knew. He thought his world was untouchable. That's not how business or life works. She bit her lip, staring at her plate. "He told me you ruined his life. He said you're trying to sabotage us because you don't like him." I leaned back, meeting her eyes. "Did he tell you what he said to me? How he mocked the life I've built? How he laughed at my home? He told me I wasn't good enough for you, that he'd be the one to take care of you now. Does that sound like respect to you?" Her face changed. Shock, then confusion, then something that looked like hurt. She whispered, "No, he didn't tell me that." The next day, she confronted him. I didn't hear it firsthand, but she later told me how it went. She had asked him directly about what he'd said at dinner, and instead of apologizing, he laughed it off. "Come on, your dad's sensitive. I was just joking. Besides, it's true, isn't it? I'll give you the life you deserve." She pressed him harder. What was he doing now that his father had lost his position? How was he going to support himself? Support her. That's when the charm slipped. He snapped, "Why are you grilling me? You think I need to prove myself to you? Don't you get it? I'm not some working stiff like your dad. I don't need to slave away to have a future. I'll figure it out. My father always fixes things." But that was the problem. His father couldn't fix this. Not anymore. When she came back to me, her eyes were red and her voice was low. "Dad, I think you were right. He's not who I thought he was. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to." Instead, I poured her a glass of water and let her sit with the truth. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones you learn by watching someone's mask fall off. Later that night, I got one more voicemail from him. His voice was raw, stripped of pride. "Please, I know I messed up. I can't lose her. Just talk to her for me. Tell her I'm not as bad as I seemed. Please, help me." But I didn't return the call, because it wasn't my job to rescue him or to convince my daughter of anything. She had finally seen the man for who he really was. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. The fallout came quickly. His father, humiliated and angry, cut him off completely. No more allowance, no more safety net, no more credit card for emergencies. He went from designer restaurants and weekend trips to barely affording gas. The mask he wore at dinner, the rich, untouchable air, was crumbling fast. I started hearing stories. Friends saw him selling off watches and sneakers he once flaunted. Someone else mentioned spotting him arguing with his father in a parking lot, shouting, "You can't just leave me like this." The same young man who had laughed at my modest home was now fighting for scraps. Meanwhile, my daughter came by more often. She helped me cook, sat with me on the porch, and asked questions she hadn't asked in years. "How did you start your business, Dad? Did you ever think it would succeed?" There was genuine curiosity in her voice, the kind I used to wish for when she was younger. I told her the truth, that it had been slow, hard, and full of sacrifices. That success wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. That real security comes from discipline, not handouts. She listened, nodding, and I could see the gears turning. It hit me then. She had never really seen the difference between building and inheriting, between a man who creates stability and a man who borrows it. And now, watching her boyfriend spiral, the contrast was impossible to ignore. One night, she admitted, "I thought he had it all together. Cars, the clothes, the trips. But now that it's gone, he's lost. He doesn't know who he is without it." I didn't add salt to the wound. Simply said, wealth without character is a house without a foundation. It looks good until the first storm comes. She nodded quietly, her eyes heavy with understanding. Meanwhile, her boyfriend's desperation grew. He sent flowers to her office, left voicemails promising change. Even showed up outside her apartment building once, shouting her name until security escorted him away. Each gesture, instead of winning her back, only pushed her further away. She told me about one of their last conversations. He had begged, "Don't leave me now, I need you. You can't just walk away when I'm down." And she, with tears in her eyes, had answered, "You laughed at my father, called his life beneath you, and pretended you could take care of me. But now I see the truth, you can't even take care of yourself." When she told me this, I felt both proud and sad. Proud that she finally saw through him. Sad that it had taken this much pain for her to realize it. But that's how lessons work. Sometimes they're not taught, they're lived. As for him, the man who once promised to give her the world was now standing outside of it, knocking on doors that would no longer open. And there was nothing left for me to say. It didn't take long for him to hit rock bottom. Without his father's money, he discovered that luxury friends vanish quickly. The ones who once tagged along on trips stopped answering his calls. The restaurants where he once tipped big no longer knew his name. And the credit lines he'd leaned on for years were now maxed out. I heard he moved into a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town, nothing like the penthouse suites he once bragged about. The sports car he had used to impress my daughter was sold, replaced with a second-hand sedan that broke down twice in a month.
Oh.
The laughter he once used to mock my simple lifestyle was gone. Meanwhile, my daughter's visits became routine. She'd stop by after work, kick off her shoes, and help me water the garden or cook dinner. Sometimes we sat in silence. Other times we talked about her childhood, memories she hadn't thought about in years. Slowly, I felt her walls come down, and the bond between us strengthened in a way I hadn't realized was missing. One evening, she said softly, "I used to think your life was boring, predictable. But now I see it's steady, it's real. And that's worth more than anything he ever flashed in my face." I didn't gloat. I just smiled and said, "Steady isn't boring, kiddo. Steady means you can count on it." Meanwhile was still spiraling. He left one last voicemail for her, the kind that was more pathetic than angry. His voice was hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "I just need another chance. I don't have anyone else. Please. You don't understand how bad it is." But she didn't call him back. Instead, she deleted the message and looked at me across the table. "Dad, I think I'm finally done." The first time I saw relief on her face instead of conflict. She wasn't torn between the image of who she thought he was and the reality of who he'd become. She finally accepted that arrogance and entitlement had no place in her future. I couldn't lie, there was a part of me that felt vindicated, not because I'd fired his father, but because life had shown my daughter what words alone never could. She had seen for herself the difference between a man who pretends to stand tall and a man who quietly builds something solid beneath his feet. As for him, his downfall wasn't dramatic anymore, it was just sad. The man who once strutted through life had been reduced to whispers of regret, begging calls no one answered, and a hollow shell of the pride he once carried. And while he sank, my daughter and I finally rose together. A few weeks later, my daughter asked me to meet her for lunch. She chose a small cafe, the kind of place I've always liked: quiet, no pretension, just good food and good coffee. When I walked in, she was already seated, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Over sandwiches and coffee, she finally said what I'd been waiting years to hear. "Dad, I get it now. I used to think money was everything. That his world, the cars, the parties, the luxury, was what I wanted, but none of it was real. It was borrowed. The moment it was gone, so was he." I nodded, letting her continue. She swallowed hard, her eyes shining. "You've never needed to flash wealth to prove yourself. You've built everything with your own hands. Provided for me without ever bragging about it. And when he tried to belittle you, you stayed calm. That's strength, Dad. That's what I want in my life." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd spent years quietly working, sacrificing, and hoping she would one day see the difference between arrogance and integrity. Hearing her acknowledge it now felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. "I just wanted you to have a good life," I said softly. "Not an easy one, a good one. There's a difference." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I see that now. "Thank you for not stepping in sooner. Thank you for letting me learn the hard way. It hurt, but I think I needed it." Later that week, I heard through the grapevine that her ex had moved back in with distant relatives, jobless and bitter. He was still blaming everyone but himself, still clinging to the idea that someone would rescue him. It was a far cry from the man who once sat at my table, laughing at my life. But by then, he no longer mattered. What mattered was the look in my daughter's eyes when she came over for dinner, the way she asked to learn how to cook the meals I'd always made for us, the way she laughed without worry for the first time in months. I realized then that the ordeal hadn't just exposed him, it had strengthened us. My daughter finally saw me, not as the background figure who paid bills and kept life steady, but as a man who had lived with dignity, built with purpose, and loved without conditions. As we washed dishes together one evening, she said quietly, "You know, Dad, one day, when I do find someone, I want him to be like you." I didn't respond right away. My throat tightened, and I simply smiled. Because in the end, I hadn't just protected her from the wrong man, I had finally shown her what the right one looks like. If you've made it this far, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.